You're listening to Tara Lynn's A Geek Saga podcast. This episode features audio from a previously aired live video webcast.
All right, looks like we are live. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the High Fantasy Tracks panel, Game of Tricksters, which is about the trickster trope / archetype and the characters that represent it in Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. My name is Tara. I'm going to be your moderator. You can find me across the web at A Geek Saga. I am the organizer of Ice and Fire Con, which is the first ever Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire convention in the US. And I've been doing Game of Thrones panels at Dragon Con since 2012. So it's been a rockin' like 8 or 9 years or something like that. So my other panelists, I guess we'll start with, it looks to my left on my screen, which is Rebecca. I don't know how it looks for you guys, but we'll go Rebecca, Andrew, Chloe in that order.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Fant. Online, I'm at Chewbacca Cosplay. That's just where I post my cosplay stuff. I'm actually hoping to work on a season 7 Sansa and Arya later this year. I'm just a big Game of Thrones fan and nerd in general. By day, I'm a teacher. I teach 8th grade history. And by night, I'm reading sci-fi and fantasy. So I'm glad to be here.
All right, hey guys, I'm Andrew. This is my first virtual Dragon Con, but this is my 8th total Dragon Con. I'm counting this one. And this is the least panels I've had this year, so very interesting. But I am also on the Small Council, which is the organizing group for Ice and Fire Con. And you can find me at Stat Check Podcast, which is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And I'm glad to be here today talking about Tricksters in Game of Thrones.
Hi guys, my name is Chloe. Tara put me last because I have a Daenerys level of titles to talk about. No, my name is Chloe. You might know me from a podcast called Girls Gone Canon, where we analyze His Dark Materials and A Song of Ice and Fire currently. We're going through A Song of Ice and Fire point of view character by point of view character. We just started Asha Greyjoy this week, so we're having fun with that. And I'm also a member of the Small Council for Ice and Fire Con. You can check out some of the pieces of meta that I've written about A Song of Ice and Fire and His Dark Materials at liesanarborgold.com as well.
All right, well, now that we've got all of our lengthy introductions out of the way, so we're going to get started. So I'm assuming if people are watching this panel that you kind of know a little bit about the trickster trope or archetype. Honestly, some just to get the basics out of the way, just in case, some famous tricksters in mythology: Loki, Dionysus, Anansi. I'd say mythology and folklore, really. Tricksters are, they're known as ambiguous characters. They're deceivers, shapeshifters, imitators of gods. They're very often, almost always, anti-authority, and they're meant to challenge our ideas of the usual constructs of society and make us question and possibly reject those ideas. And honestly, you know, it I don't know if it's always been like this, but I feel like in the past decade or so, maybe it's just the Marvel movies have brought it out in people or something, but I feel like there's just been a growing kind of first interest, but sometimes bordering on obsession with these characters. But let's be honest, a lot of that is because they are some of the most interesting characters in, you know, literature and media. So I know Chloe had, I believe, brought up she found some information on the 6 traits of tricksters. You want to let us know what those are, Chloe?
Yeah, from the book Mythical Trickster Figures from Hines and Doty. They said that every trickster has at least a few of the following traits: fundamentally ambiguous and anomalous, deceiver and trick player, shapeshifter or master of disguise, situation inverter, messenger and imitator of the gods, and sacred and lewd bricolor. Basically, it's not all of them.
Can you define that word, Chloe? Because bricolor is a big word for me.
It's a little early for a Dragon Con Saturday. I'm sorry. Backtrack on that, Andrew. It's basically adultery or like trickery or construction and creation of available things. So someone who creates something, or a god, a lot of trickster gods, or life creating, like biological creation. So maybe a little bit of that.
Like when Zeus would swoop in and be like, yo, I'm an eagle. Now I'm a sexy dude.
Yeah, except like that and his bajillion children, except Robert in what we're talking about.
Boom.
Segues.
Yeah, and there's a lot of those, and I think like there's different types of tricksters, right? Because you have sort of what you would think is more in your face tricksters, and I hate to bring it to, but like Loki, the trope, I think he's more of in your face trickster. Versus in Game of Thrones, you have people who are kind of low key. You have the Littlefinger, you have Varys, which are a little bit more on the low than some of the other trickster archetypes.
Well, let's be clear. When you speak of Littlefinger and Varys not being obvious tricksters, I'm assuming you're speaking of the book versions of those characters.
Book! We are talking about the book, people. We'll always be talking about the book. And if you'd like to know more about the book, there'll be a Windsor Winter panel tomorrow. Check in then.
I mean, and there's a lot of very obvious, like, and honestly, as much as you say they're more low key tricksters, Varys and Littlefinger. I mean, they're secretive. Yes, I don't know if I still think it's pretty obvious that they are what they are. There's. Go ahead.
No. I say that because the quotes, right? So if you go to the book quotes, they say, about Littlefinger, I believe the quote is, he's so friendly, he gets along with everybody. So that's why people just end up falling into it. Even if they kind of get a whiff of, okay, this guy's got an agenda, he's just so easy to get along with that they go along with it. Varys is the same way. He's always appearing to be helpful. He's always appearing to be, subservient. That makes him, when he turns out to be running counter to their course, they're so surprised, like Ned or like Kevin Lannister. That was a complete surprise because they just would never expect that type of person to do that thing.
I did see when I was doing a little bit of research for this panel, I did see someone refer to Varys as the ultimate catfish.
I love that. Really, that is very 2020.
Yeah, it really is. Like, he's great at changing his appearance, not just like his clothing and his overall look, but even his voice. So, and I think it might have even been in the same thing that I was reading. It was a Reddit post or something. Maybe the person mentioned that Varys killing Kevin Lannister at the end of book 5 shows that he's not, above causing chaos to get what he wants, which is very much, that's really one of the top things with tricksters. Like what they want might not be what like we as society would think of as like the good ending or whatever, but I don't know, man. Like Varys might have some points, and him and Littlefinger both definitely go about their business and do whatever they have to do. And it's often very, Littlefinger's just tricksy constantly.
So but I guess that's a good question though. Maybe everybody on the panel can have a thought about it. Mm-hmm. Does a trickster have to have an agenda? Like clearly Littlefinger has an agenda, Varys has an agenda. But then there's other types of tricksters, like you might say Tyrion, when he's, jesting with people. He's debatably a trickster. I think he's doing it for the lulz. He's like doing it for himself. I don't think he's doing that with necessarily a long-term agenda. He just wants his own self-entertainment, which I think is in the line of almost Loki.
I think it could go either way. I think that's the fun of it though, is when someone doesn't have an agenda or you don't know their agenda, it kind of adds that spontaneity, but then you also like following along with the ones that do. And I like how in Game of Thrones there is a variation with those two, like you said with Tyrion, and then versus Littlefinger or Varys.
Yeah, Littlefinger, coming back to him, he's very much so like the Dolos, right? Like Dolos in mythology and Greek mythology starts off by trying to recreate a statue and like kind of shove it off as real and be like, yeah, give me my money. It's a real statue. And the gods are like, this isn't real, but it's actually really a really good statue of Alethea. You did okay. And then because of that, they decided, you know what, Dolos, we're going to promote you to keep getting one over on people so that we can kind of launder money, basically, and like steal money from people for paying for illegitimate art. And because of that, that's kind of who Littlefinger's character is, right? Like the show kind of makes him this super 4D chess playing guy. But Littlefinger is more in the books everybody's friend, right? Everyone's like, oh, Littlefinger is not a problem. The guy down the lane, Joey down the street, grew up with us in River Run. He's a great guy. They don't see it coming, which is part of that trickery. And of course, they're not reading the books, right? Like the characters are not reading the books, not to break the fourth page wall. We're reading the books. There's stuff that George obviously wants us to read, which is something really interesting for Littlefinger. We'll talk later on a little bit about his relationship with Sansa and how that's his Achilles, right? Like he so blinded by that he's giving his secrets and trickery away, which he's never given away before. So I think that's a really interesting dimension to the character in the books. We get kind of a microcosm of it in the show, but that's something that's a total kind of like tricky God move. He raises himself up the ranks and then he stabs you in the back.
I don't want to change the subject entirely, but we did have a comment from somebody on YouTube saying it from Jatko Muir. I'm fairly certain I'm pronouncing the last name right. Not sure about the first name. Apologies, but saying Varys is so interesting as a trickster because he also embodies the sort of liminal nature of many tricksters, moving between boundaries such as gender and countries' borders. I honestly, I think I'd forgotten maybe that he did dress up as a woman at one point.
Yes, he did. Mm-hmm.
I'm reading this. I'm thinking, oh, I thought that was a fanfic.
No, that's
that
legit.
I read. Like honestly,
it's the fanfic called The Book.
Yeah, right. It's been about 3.5 years since I reread these, but yeah, I legit read this comment thinking like, wow, that was actually in the books. As soon as I'm reading this, I remember it now, but I really thought it was a fanfic for a second there. So yeah, and like you said with Littlefinger, like being non-threatening, Varys is non-threatening as well. He's a eunuch, and even Tyrion, which this is where I think with Tyrion, Martin does most of his work, both creating a trickster type character and also breaking down the trope. He's playing a role that others assign to him more often than not. And really he doesn't have an agenda, I don't think, at the beginning. Like he really doesn't. He eventually does for sure, but from at the start, it's more about
hedonism. He's pure hedonism.
He really is just playing the role that people have put to him at that point.
I would also say that for Tyrion, George is, and something that George is doing with this trickster role, he does actually explore it a lot for disability. As far as like Tyrion's disability and him coming out as this monster to his family, yes, he kind of is just rolling with chaos at first, but it's also sticking it to the system that has stuck it to him. Mm-hmm. He has been born a monster. He has no reason. Why would he want to be better? He's rich. He doesn't have a want. He can have as much wine, as many women as he wants to fill that hole, that vacuous hole, right, in his heart. And I think that from like the adultery and stuff, it's like very, very much, we joke about the god of tits and wine with Tyrion's comments on, the god of tits and wine and hoping he dies, similarly to that trope. And he doesn't, but does kind of have a motive at first, which is when we see him in A Dance with Dragons, hanging out with the maybe Blackfire regime, definitely Blackfire regime. He wants to stoke that war because he's just mad at the world. I mean, that's the biggest thing about Tyrion. It's boo-hoo. He lets his disability get the better of him, and his dad's a monster, as we see how it messes with his whole family. And when you look at Greek mythology, the Lannisters are, as we know, like that's the house of Atreides. They are some incestual, downfall, tragic people, and all of it is pure like mythological gold. And I think Tywin as a god, there's so many different tricksters who try to get one over on the god Tywin in this story, and we'll definitely explore that throughout today.
And I think the key thing is there, and you mentioned with the disability, is the constantly underestimating these people, right? You're constantly, underestimating what the half man can do or what the eunuch can do, and you're not expecting those people. The people who are known threats, Tywin Lannister, Jaime, they're always targets. They have a target painted on their back, but nobody's going in to, go on them on the eunuch or kick the half man, that he's because of that disability, they view him as less. That is to their detriment because they have no idea what they're actually capable of, which is far more than they perceive.
Well, I mean, and I feel like I didn't want to miss pointing out also that House Lannister was literally founded by a trickster, Lan the Clever. So, and honestly, like, I think that, yes, of course, that's Song of Ice and Fire's own mythology. I'm sure things were in many ways, his story is told bigger than it actually happened. But I think it's interesting or important to point out that House Lannister was founded by a trickster, because I feel like in the end it's going to end up with a trickster too. So
yeah. And there's a good point in the chat. They brought up that, culturally, like in Chinese culture, eunuchs were viewed as scheming tricksters, and there were eunuchs that usurped the court and ruled. There's a eunuch that took over the court and ruled as emperor. And I think, once again, George draws from these historical influences. So I would not be surprised. I personally, and Chloe and Tara, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if he's specifically drawn from that, but I mean, he surely looked at historical influences, and that's been something that's been a perception in Middle Eastern courts, Chinese courts, other courts that have had eunuchs as part of their court culture.
Yeah, for how few he puts in the story, I think he's definitely done his research on that, and those influences very present.
Yeah, for sure. So before we move on from the kind of obvious Littlefinger, Varys, Tyrion, I also wanted to mention the Faceless Men, who I think, Rebecca, I mean, are you a big Arya fan, Rebecca?
I'm more of a Sansa stan, but I enjoy Arya as well.
I think all three of us gals here are Sansa stans. So the Faceless, I just asked because I want to make sure you get to talk as well. I think you might have some notes for a little bit later, though, particularly about Sansa. But before we move on to some less obvious tricksters, the Faceless Men are kind of another more obvious one, because while everyone who knows who they are, like who actually knows who they are and what they do, is rightfully afraid of them, at the same time, like, they operate in the background. So between their ability to change their appearances, I just think they're worth a mention. But do you guys have any thoughts on them, and whether or not it's just whether or not the being able to change their appearance thing makes them tricksters, or if they are too serious to be tricksters, maybe?
I would consider them a trickster. I mean, it's obvious them changing their face, but I think also the hidden motives. We can see that they're up to something, but not everyone knows what they're doing, or if they're even up to something at all. We get the hints and can put that together, which I love about the Faceless Men.
And being able to be no one and yet be anyone is a valuable trait of being a trickster. That's the quintessential thing. Now, they may not fall into the square, peg of the trope, but I think they have elements of that. And certainly when you compare them to the trickster gods, to the in a way, the Faceless Men are immortal, because they're a faceless man is a position. It's not necessarily a person, right? They are no one. So that they're an eternal. They're essentially this god in an institution. So in that way, I do see the parallel.
And Chloe, what you were saying earlier about some of the traits, messenger of the gods, they definitely feel like there's some sort of messenger of the gods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you put this into like actual mythological form, the Greek myth would be that like someone came to the water in the House of Undying, and the god said, "Here, child, here's the power of, the assassination, and here's the power of shape-shifting." Like, the gods are granting them shape-shifting power. And there's even a line about the Dragon Lords of the Freehold and the first Faceless Men who changed, that Arya learns. And the name of no one's in mythology are tricksters. The slaves cried out to a god with 100 different faces, one god with 100 faces. And when you look at that, it is an imitating god. It's a god that imitates. It's a shapeshifter. So I think that's absolutely something very much so trickster. I mean, they are literally changing their shape. They can never be the same shape again. Coyote politics too that they follow, which is the other like,
and Tara, I think
keep your enemy guessing.
And to go into this, because I think Chloe and Tara, this ties into a question we got in the chat.
I was going to say.
Which, no, it does. It really does. No, because it says, in the question was, in A Song of Ice and Fire, is being a trickster and deception overpowered when compared to honorable actions, combat, and other more straightforward engagements, or at least displayed as such? And that's by Prince Phocion. forgive me if I pronounce that wrong. I'll just give a quick comment that I think that deception is accurately displayed in its power because it's subverting a norm. But what you're not seeing is the hundreds of normal engagements, because in the course of a book, you're not seeing how many normal duels were fought. Right. So when you see one duel that employs trickery, like Bronze Duel, where he used different tactics, it's effective because it's not normal. You may see that as in the book more because that makes a better story. But what you're not seeing is the cultural norms that are just day to day that are being subverted. So that's my thought on that.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on that question? Whether, being a trickster and the deception that comes along with that is overpowered when compared to, the more honorable things like combat, etc.
I think George definitely puts an emphasis on it because I think he values the mind, and I think he said in the past he identifies with Tyrion a lot. But I wouldn't say always. That's part of the fun, is not having a clear answer that it'll always win or always lose.
That's a great comment, because I mean, that's the other thing, is like, it is specific who is a trickster. There are people with trickster traits. That doesn't necessarily make them tricksters. And I think that something like Arya in this role is a trickster, and she pulls tricks even at Harrenhal, right? On Weiss and on the goat. Characters we'll probably talk about today. And I do want to say that when Arya is portraying or being Cat of the Canals in Bravos, right, and she's going around selling people clams and cockles and oysters, she's tricking people out of their knowledge by selling them that food, right? Like, she's trading the food, but she's using that to gain knowledge. But also, if we're talking about like fables and Aesop's, does that mean that in Bravos, Arya is Puss in Boots?
That's a good one. That's a good one.
That is good.
Thank you. I saved that for you guys. I was like, oh, I'm going to lay it on them.
That's a good one.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do. Are you going to handle this comment here? Because I've been holding back here.
Yeah. I do want to say real quick. So just because Chloe mentioned on her podcast, they also do His Dark Materials. I actually started reading the books after watching season 1 of the show, and Arya reminds me a lot of Lyra.
Yes.
With the renaming of herself, like giving people the other names and everything. And it's like,
yes,
you don't really think of Arya as a trickster because her story is sad and serious in a lot of ways, but she's constantly tricking people, like not just playing little tricks when she's at Harrenhal, but the changing of her name, the being able to like just lie so easily and fool people about who she is. I mean, and honestly, one of the good things that the show did, and really only because they had to, I guess, but when they shoved Arya and Tywin together at Harrenhal, the stuff between her and Tywin was great, because like he actually saw through her in some ways, like, I think, but she was still able to fool this like god of a man. So yeah, that was a good change the show made, and it showed her skill for sure.
Something about Arya at Harrenhal in general, those plots are very Greek myths. Like in the books, Vargo Hoat is something I want to bring up. Vargo Hoat gets kind of replaced in the show. They just let Harrenhal be a little different, but in the books, Vargo...
No Zorse.
Yes, he rides in with his very merry men of awfulness and misfits. And Vargo Hoat is called the goat, right? So he's like half man, half goat, which makes him a satyr, a trickster. And he actually has a perfect trickster arc. So in the beginning, he switches sides, right, from the north to Tywin's crew and back and forth. And he ends up tricking Tywin, a god, by chopping off Jaime's hand in the books. So by the end of his plot, he's done awful things, like puts Brienne in the bear pits that Jaime has to get her out of. And at the end of his story, he actually gets punished by getting his hands chopped off. Like, that's what the mountain shows up. Tywin's man chops his hands off. So that pays for him chopping Jaime's hands off. And in the end, he's forced to eat himself until he's killed, and the gross stuff that comes with A Song of Ice and Fire. But it's a perfect arc, right? Like, that's a trickster arc. He tricks people, and he chops off Jaime's hand. He gets the eye for an eye from Tywin the god, loses his hand. I just thought it was such an interesting portrayal of tricksters in the story.
Yeah. I when I saw you had mentioned some Vargo Holt notes that you had to me, and I was like, oh gosh, like you don't think about characters like that a lot of the time. All right, so I do want to get to some of these questions. Which one specifically, Andrew? Because the first one
I'm all about the Cersei.
Okay,
Cersei
yeah.
is a trickster with her.
Yes.
I ate his children situation.
Yeah. So would you consider Cersei a trickster? This person, Amy Blackfire, said she sure tricks Bobby B.
Heyo.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like Cersei is not very good at things and stuff.
Well, hold on. I think that she actually was successful in tricking Bobby B. I think, and we only see the end of their relationship, but clearly they had a relationship for a certain length of time in which she was able to convincingly play that role. I think we get to the end of the role where her F's given are very low, but she'd been playing that role for a long time. This was not like 10 days and she was out. This was years in the making. 3 children, that's a lot of time to be playing that role.
I think with Cersei too, she thinks she's a trickster, but she isn't necessarily to everyone else. In her head she is, and she has a couple of the traits, but we're seeing her in her headspace, but that's a lot different than how everyone else is seeing her on the outside.
Yeah, she definitely, and like you look at it again mythologically, like she bears children for the king but tricks him and they're not his. And in mythology, like she's very close to actual Cersei in Greek mythology, who like tricks men to her island and feeds them poisoned wine and they turn into animals. Like that's definitely a trick. She does trick him, but she's not a trickster because she does not successfully pull off the trick. And as we know, she's probably not gonna live to the end of the story. I'm just putting it out there. I know that's a spicy take. Everyone's probably in the comments getting blown.
What are you kidding? She's not gonna be like the second to last person to die.
Queen Cersei, no.
She survives past the last chapter of The Winds of Winter. I'm just going to throw my hands up in the air, and you can hear more about that tomorrow at 1 p.m. on this channel. Make sure you subscribe, hit the like button on this video.
Smash that like button.
Smash it. Don't forget. But yeah, Rebecca is totally right. Cersei thinks she's a trickster, and Cersei,
yes, exactly.
Tragic downfall in store for her, unfortunately.
She basic.
Yeah, she basic.
So we also have a comment from a crisp, and all I can think of now is potato chips. So
very British
where my
potato
mind's
chips.
at. You also see people try and outsmart and flatter the tricksters on the Titan's daughter by trying to make sure Arya remembers their names and by giving her gifts. So that's just a comment, but if anybody had any thoughts on it before we go on to some of the less obvious ones.
I think we can move on to the less obvious ones. I think that's a good observation.
So I think I'm going to go backwards in the notes that I have from myself, and I think really you guys did more of this input than I did. But I'm going to go from the bottom up because I saw this last one and I have to. Patch face.
So obsessed.
Yeah, well, whatever. I literally have like patch face like dolls that people have made. Like
that's creepy.
Yeah, like little ones. They're cute. So patch face is probably a trickster, right? Like he's a potential messenger. I would say straight up he's a messenger of the gods.
I don't know. I mean, I think that might, the difference between a trickster and an insanity, right? It's just someone who is literally insane, and that just coming off as trickery because you don't know what to expect. Certainly, he's a person that people underestimate. Like he's always underestimated, but what's coming from him has like intense value. So in that way, he fits partially into that trope.
I feel like he's definitely a prophetic fool, obviously. Like prophetic fool is his first, but there's trickery. I think also the other thing that, since prophetic fool comes first, you have to look into like prophecy. And obviously we know prophecy is up to who gets it or listens to it, analyzes it, etc. So I guess, this is all subjective because it's all meta and we can, we're live, we have the microphones. So yeah, throw him in there. He can be a trickster today. Everyone's a trickster today, Tara.
I mean, I just, he is like, I'm honestly not sure which one of you put these notes in here about Patch. It's Rebecca. The idea of him being a deceiver, I'm not sure he is.
Because
I
of
feel
intent.
like,
Because intent. That's what I can't
yeah.
get. You need intent, and that's what I don't know whether he has.
Well, that's
control.
what we don't know whether
Yeah.
or not he has. But I think that's why he's an interesting addition to the discussion, because like there is more to him than meets the eye, and we don't know whether there is intent there. Assuming there isn't, like nobody in the story thinks there is. Obviously, they all just think he's the fool, Patrick's the fool running around being weird and crazy. Nobody listens to him. Nobody pays attention to his little rhymey thing, right? Rhymey whinies that are clearly prophetic, obviously. So someone in the comments said, I know, oh. But nobody pays attention to his what he's saying, even though obviously we know as readers, because you read. I don't think the first time I read the books, like I read what he was saying, and then later it happened and was like, oh yeah, remember that time 2 books ago when Patchface said this? But obviously on rereads, you read his, prophecies and it's like, holy crap, how did I miss this? But yeah, like I think that'll be interesting to find out later. I mean, Rebecca, do you think he is like a deceiver? Do you think he knows what he's doing?
Know if he knows what he's doing. I definitely agree with you about being the messenger of the gods, maybe unwillingly. But I also liked one of the characters that said situation inverter, because when he shows up, a lot of people get real weirded out. So he kind of turns the situation around from everyone's just talking to what the heck is going on with that guy. Shireen, she's cool with it. But yeah, situation inverter and messenger of the gods, potentially a deceiver, but I don't think he knows he's doing it. I don't know if he's fully in control of himself.
Yeah. That's a. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting if, some point during Winds of Winter or Juma Spring, all of a sudden we find out that Patchface is actually this like just diabolical, like, I
don't think that's happening.
I don't think so.
I don't think it's but I will say the better comment here is one that we did not have on our list and was a good call out in the comments by Prince F here, who asks whether Euron is the most successful trickster. And talk about catfishing. I mean, he was there too. So, I think that's a good question because I can see it going both ways. So I'm interested to hear what you guys think about that.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of theories about Euron as far as like he didn't, in the books, he claims he sailed to Valyria, but like a lot of people are like, there's no way, or that he sailed like past Valyria to Ashai by the Shadow. And they're like, wait a second. Some people have figured it out. I don't even know the finer details because it's not my side of ASWAF, like there are certain cherry pick things I'm great at. Some of that stuff, I let the smarter people. But Euron definitely is a trickster like that. He maybe sold dragon eggs. He comes back with Valyrian armor at some point, maybe in the future. That's actually kind of a spoiler. I'm sorry, but we won't talk about it now. So moving past it, you'll all forget it if you don't know. If you know, you know. If you don't, you don't. And Euron comes up a lot with Bloodraven, right? Like there's a great theory by Poor Quentin from the Nauticast podcast who did a theory about how Euron is Bloodraven's failed Jedi disciple, right? So Bran is the right one. As we know, Bran is the good boyo and he's the right one. And Bloodraven's like, aha, I found him. And Euron failed. He fell. He says in his first kind of speech, we hear from, like when I was a kid, I dreamed of flying and I fell. So that's how that theory goes. I think it's probably canon at this point as a prosecutor of canon in the courts here. And Bloodraven is very Odin, right? Like even to the fact that he has ravens, that he lives in a tree of knowledge, in the one tree, like total Odin, the eye thing, the whole eyeball thing, total Odin. I think Bloodraven comes up as that, and he annoys us with the ravens through the story too, right? Like the raven shows up and sits on Jon's shoulder and is like, King, Corn King. I think those are some really strong mythological connections with those two. They're definitely tricksters in the story.
Yeah. I mean, and Euron is the person was asking whether or not him being kind of an apocalyptic crazy person would overwrite his trickster qualities. But he's still successful at what he does. You know what I mean? Like,
well, and that's why I can see it either way, right? Because people are scared to hell of Euron. When he's coming back, they're fearful of Euron. That's not a typical trait of a trickster. You know, that people are fearful of the trickster, because then you're on guard. You know that you need to be careful around this person. I think that, but the other side is that, you know, if he's done some of this incognito stuff, you know, and he's gone around and you know, had other identities, that would fall more along, just like the Faceless Men fall along the side of trickery.
He definitely has that imitator of the gods on that list. It seems like he's wanting to become a god himself. He makes fun of all the other gods, but also kind of wants their powers, drinking the shade of the evening. So I don't know if I'd classify him as a total character, but the imitator of the gods, totally.
all right. So I want to make sure, we got through all the questions that we've had so far. Since I started from the bottom, moving up, the next one was the Manderleys, particularly right now, Wyman Manderley. He's got that sort of jolly, funny, thing going on, but he's plotting. I mean, he baked Phrase into a pie, So I think he is. I think he's not one of the ones that comes to mind at first. And part of that might be because he's a minor character. We only meet him in the later books, but I mean, he is sort of fulfilling, at least right now, the trickster, role by playing sides against each other and also causing a little mayhem in the process with killing some Phrase and stuff. So do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, he plays the friendly route. Like, he's the gregarious, like, because he's this morbidly obese guy, people underestimate him. He's not, physically robust. No one would view him as physically threatening because he can't move. His what is this, his 7 chins, or 8 chins, and 6 of them were cut by the knife. I mean, they don't view him as a threat that way. And he's sort of the kill him with kindness, but meanwhile, he's building a fleet. Meanwhile, he's got the most heavy horse. Meanwhile, he's scheming. Now, some people are on to him, but I would still say he has elements of a trickster. Now, where that merges over when we're talking about honor earlier and whether honor is effective. He is doing it with an honorable agenda. Does that negate the trickster elements? I don't know.
We have a comment leading from Manderleys into Phrase real quick, I guess. Thinking it's also from a Crisp, again with the potato chips, kill me. Thinking about Walder Frey, particularly about him using verbal trickery when he slips in a mayhaps when treating with Rob, like he's playing that Lord of the Crossing game. Would we call Walder Frey a trickster?
He sure does pull a big trick.
He thinks he is. He thinks it's really funny. He's more of a troll.
Yeah.
Yeah, the troll that lives under the frickin' bridges.
Exactly.
I would add that's a really an interesting connection, because the Red Wedding is Tom from the fantasy track here just said the ultimate trick. And it's such a trick, that at first you're so engrossed in the surroundings, you don't see it coming. But afterwards, Rob is spoken of as the trickster, right? Like they say that it was vile sorcery, everything Rob's done in his campaign. If you take it back a book to Clash, when Sansa is being beat in front of the court, Lancel is proclaiming that Rob was a trickster in the field. So Walder Frey isn't like a huge trickster publicly. Everyone's like, he's too old, blah, 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 like we said. But he actually pulled this big trick while letting everybody else think that Rob, using sorcery and warging, just like Sansa is spoken about later, that it's him that's the bad guy. So it's really interesting to see where the PR kind of lays in the story too, right? Like, we know they're tricksters, but no one else does at all.
Well, and I guess like this kind of begs the question though, where do you draw, especially in this series, where do you draw the line between whether a character is in fact a trickster or whether they're just a plotter and schemer? Somebody asked, by this is House Tyrell or Olenna a trickster? I mean, I think there's a little bit of that to Olenna specifically, because she plays this like I'm just a little old lady, particularly in the books. The way she's described is a lot less daunting than the way she was portrayed in the show. Though of course we love Lady Olenna in the show. Let's be honest. I think that with this series, there's a very there's a lot of gray area between whether a character is in fact a trickster, whether they actually fit the characteristics, the trope, the archetype, versus whether they are just a plotter. And I think like Walder Frey, like, man, I don't know, dude's a jerk. Like does he pull off this giant trick? Sure he does, but like, I mean, I don't think it's a trickster thing with him. I just
there's more to an archetype than deception alone.
Yes.
Just saying that you pulled off a deceptive thing, anybody is capable of that. But doing that as part of a matter of course, almost like you're doing it as a day-to-day thing. It's part of a longer strategy, or in this case, as an archetype, your personality. Right? I think Walder Frey engaged in that deception because he was salty, because his normal plan of going along with it, of extortion, being a bully, that didn't work at first. So he employed deception because he knew the straightforward approach wouldn't work.
Yeah. And I think that like Andrew said, there's more to it than just being able to deceive somebody. Like just because they trick somebody doesn't make them a trickster. I think Wyman Manderly can fit this because there's several aspects to his character and to the way, the things he's doing and everything that play to the archetype as a whole versus Walder Frey, who, I mean, he wears, like, everybody knows what he is. Okay. Everybody knows what he is. And he's not ashamed or afraid or anything to sit there and be like, yeah, whatever, I'm Walder Frey. Like, so I just think that there's, we could definitely easily shove them into the category, but there's enough of the actual tricksters in the story to not have to do that. Now someone's asking, best or most impactful backfiring tricks, such as Ox Cross for Rob and Edmund, or Victarion's tricksy plan to steal Dany and the dragons. And this will lead into some things Chloe wanted to get into about Dany, I think. But
I mean, Quentin too. Quentin.
I was gonna say Quentin. Yeah.
Quentin. I mean, that's literally back on fire.
Yikes.
Yeah. But I mean, these are talking about like tricks that backfired isn't necessarily talking about tricksters as a whole, but I mean, we haven't seen Victarion even try to steal Dany and the dragon.
And let's be concrete, because I think we waffle a lot on this. Victarion is 100% not a trickster archetype. He does not have a trickster archetype in his bones whatsoever. I mean, he's probably getting tricked right now in many, many ways.
Yeah, I mean, he's literally sailing east. He has gotten tricked already. He's been tricked by Euron.
And Dusky Woman too. I mean, we're going
yeah. Just get him off the table. That's the whole point. Get Victarion off the table so that Euron can do his job.
But that does lead us into being able to talk about Dany, which Chloe wanted to do. So go ahead.
Well, I just think there's something so interesting that Dany's actually a really big trickster. You would not think Dany's a trickster, right? Like Andrew's shaking his head at me. He generally head at me though, so that's not that different from usual. Just keep up. Dany is a trickster because she's a trickster by reputation and by what she does. She's seen as the fragile, skinny girl with the pale silver Valyrian looks, and that somehow has dragons. And she's almost like Prometheus, right? Stealing fire from the beginning, having these dragons that is unnatural, not natural for there to be dragons now after they've all died out. And I almost think that Dany is kind of, I know I used it for Bloodraven, but akin to Odin in the story in a lot of ways. Odin was this walking contradiction. How can this skinny, lithe girl, this little 13, 14, 15-year-old be having, depending on what you're like viewing, 18. I don't know what she is in the show. No one knows. But how can she have this huge nuclear power of these dragons? She's a war god, right? Like everyone hears of her bringing war. She somehow takes all these slave cities and like sacks the masters and like flips all the economies, everything on their ground. Odin's people, his leaders, his elite war leaders, were not great dudes, right? Like you wouldn't want to have a drink with them, like probably not the greatest guys, but they were elite and powerful and dangerous, and they were the top of prestige. And these people like sought him out, but Odin was also cursed for being a trickster. We look at A Storm of Swords. Dany pulls the ultimate trick with her dragons, right? When she offers the slaver her dragon and the dragon roasts him and she now has an army. And you look at how Dario sacks the city for her, right? Like she uses her wiles for him to pull the trick while they're all drunk and going to bed to go sack a slave city and give her this city. And even as far as Mimir's head that Odin keeps, Viserys's gilded head, it's pretty spot on. It's pretty spot on.
I mean, I would say that
I think it's a round hole, but I mean, you're trying to fit it in there really well, Chloe, and you almost convinced me. But certainly she does subvert cultural norms, and I think that is a huge part of her character arc, is how much she subverts norms and expectations. So I'll give you that part.
Well, while we're on some female characters that you maybe wouldn't expect as tricksters, we might as well, we're getting kind of close to the end. We got about 10 minutes left. So let's move into what might be our final point, especially with us, especially with the four of us, or at least the three of us on this side of the screen. Sansa. Learning trickster moves from Littlefinger. Rebecca, you wanna? I know we're all three of us gals are Sansa stans, but Rebecca hasn't said much in a bit. So go on with your Sansa.
Yeah, I love Sansa, and I loved her in the show, but I'm super excited to see what happens in the book, because I feel like it's a lot more nuanced. It's more of a slow build. We're getting some of that disguise already in the Eyrie with her hair color, but also she's changing her age. George even goes so far as to change the chapter titles to show how immersed she is in these other identities, which I love. So I'm really excited to see where that goes. I think some of the other points, she's learning how to invert situations. She's starting to get those skills, starting to be a bit more ambiguous. Not really a messenger of the gods, but even with, like, if you want to bring in warging abilities, shape-shifting abilities, we see some of that with Sansa too. All the Starks, but her especially fitting with the other stuff she's learning from Littlefinger. I love her as a potential future trickster.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that Sansa really has it in her to totally fulfill the trope, but I definitely think that she's going to play the game as one for a little while. I don't know. Does anybody else have like additional thoughts on that?
She's learning from the best. I mean, what can I say? I mean, so she's going to have to employ that to a certain extent. Now, the question is, how much does that change her? That which is a question in, I think, a lot of fiction, is how much does going through that and doing that change you internally, right? Can you become that archetype by having to employ those tactics, or do you retain an archetype or character that is distinct from those archetypes? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, and when we go back to like A Storm of Swords, for example, there's a passage where Littlefinger basically tells her, what's more dangerous, the dagger brandished by an enemy or the one pressed to your back you never even see? And he explains that he has 3 hidden daggers in talking about different men from the Vale that are paid and on his side, and how he's basically positioned them on the chessboards that they're playing against each other, or pardon me, the Savas board. And he tells her at depth, like, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm doing this. But while he does that, what he's doing is explaining, this is how you can understand how my mind works, Sansa. And, oh, this is how you will actually end up defeating me, because he's handing her the information, right? It's his failure as a trickster. And another spoiler, I think he might die in the books too, because it turns out the bad villains that aren't that great at what they do die. Anyways, I digress. Under your belt, Andrew. But he's going to give away the game in the end, right? Like that's the problem. And that's why when you look at someone, like I said earlier, Vargo Hoat, he has the full trickster arc, because tricksters don't usually survive the story, right? For the most part, tricksters usually in the end get caught by the gods they're trying to play with.
Yeah, that is true. And somebody in the comments, a crisp again, said, I think that because humor is, this is a comment I'm reading, I'm not saying this as myself. I think since humor is associated with trickery, and women in Song of Ice and Fire usually have a more internal humor, often steeped in irony, they aren't usually associated with trickery, which is absolutely true. I mean, like I said earlier about Arya, like her story is a very sad and serious story. Whether or not you want to believe it, it is, deal with it. Like, girl is literally just a child of war. But she still very much, despite being sad and serious, fits. I honestly think she fits the trickster, archetype more than a lot of other characters do. And I think that, with Sansa, it's definitely, she's not there yet, but I think she's definitely gonna, like I said, she's gonna play that game for at least a little while, before she settles into be Queen of the North for the rest of her long, long life, hopefully.
I think she's definitely going to use some stuff against Harry the Heir. I'm going to be interested to see what happens with him. I just feel like I don't know if he's not longed for this world, but, good things are going to happen to Harry.
So I think those are the Cersei tactics. That's the Cersei brand of trickery right there.
I'd also say like Sansa fits a hero's journey pretty exact. If you line up the major plot points of Sansa's story, it is a hero's arc. The Stark kids fit that. Bran obviously fits the hero's journey. Jon has some big moments of the hero's journey. Even Arya has some. They have the Jedi training montage, that's a big part of it. And so Sansa using some of the trickery that she comes up with, it's part of that mentor kind of arc, right? Like that is where the mentor comes in, and then it turns out the mentor is bad and the mentor becomes an obstacle for the hero that they have to get over. So I think that's kind of where a lot of those like shape-shifting, decepting, imitating a god, passing judgment on life, as we know is a big thing for the North. He swings the sword. That kind of stuff all fits in with some of those trickster things. And that's another mention of where that trickster trope comes in the story. But again, I guess it doesn't always dictate it.
All right, so we're getting close to needing to wrap up. I think we have like a few minutes left. So does anybody have any, 5 minutes actually. So does anybody have any like last thoughts that we maybe missed, or that you kind of came up with while we were talking that you haven't?
Well, you missed one comment, and I will do this as a bump to tomorrow. Yes, you did, which is George R.R. Martin the ultimate trickster?
Yeah.
Which I think, if we want to interpret it as when the book will be done, I think that's very much true. But you'll learn more about that on tomorrow's panel.
I mean, like, honestly, I think that it's easy now that we have the 5 books that we do have to, like, when you're reading them one after another, to be like, oh yeah, I knew this. But yeah, listen, Martin, he absolutely, like, he turned stuff on its head a lot when he was writing these. I mean, if you actually had to wait between books, like wait for the publication, like we've been waiting for Winds of Winter, but if you were waiting for those, what was it, 5 years, I think 6 years, something like that, between Feast and Dance, like and there's still so many things like that hadn't been explained. I mean, really, let's be real, Martin is the ultimate trickster in a lot of ways, and maybe that's why he writes them so well.
I mean, he really enjoys subverting norms.
Exactly.
He does that so consistently with almost all of his characters. There's very few you can find that aren't in some way subverting a trope.
Yeah, for sure. Well, anything else, guys? Like, I don't want to miss anything. No, you guys.
No, I love getting to explore this stuff, right? Like, it's very much like mythology and Aesop's fables and some of the different fun stuff. And George obviously utilizes it. Like, we started with Land the Clever that Tara mentioned, and even look at Floris the Fox, the head of House Florent, which was Reynard the Fox, basically, is what we're looking at there, right? With the trickery. And I don't know, I think it's just a cool thing to play with, whether it dictates the story or whether it's just something he can roll the dice and say, this guy can be a trickster in the story. We'll let him live for a couple books.
We have a speed round here. Quick last question. I think we can slip it in, which is what do we think about Brown Ben Plum and then maybe Doran Martell? Doran Martell.
I think Doran probably falls more into the plotter and schemer role, because he's not, yes, he's gouty and he's kind of stuck in his chair and everything like that, but he's not, I don't think he's really trying to trick, he's not tricking anybody with anything. He's still Prince of Dorne. He's still like a very, very powerful man. So I think he's definitely more of a plotter or schemer versus a trickster.
And Brown Ben Plum, I think, is really immersive. I mean, there's a few people that embody the mercenary mindset, and the mercenary archetype, and I think he is one of them. Now he has principles, he's like a principled rogue, but I wouldn't call him a trickster necessarily.
Yeah, Doran's definitely a depressed schemer, right? Like too depressed to actually get stuff done because, like trauma and all that, like everything does. But I don't know, that's an interesting thought. I didn't think of that one either as far as Brown Ben Plum, but in a way, I like what you said, Andrew, that it is the mercenary, right? Goes where the money is good, which is, I get that. I understand that. So pull some tricks to get the money.
Absolutely.
Rebecca, do you have any thoughts about Brown Ben Plum or Doran?
I'm kind of sad I didn't think of Doran before, but I do view him more as a plotter. He's more withholding his plans rather than actively pulling a trick over someone's head. Like, said, in the open with who he is. He's just not telling everyone the full picture of what he wants to do.
I think a lot of the... Sorry, Andrew. When he does tell them, he tells Ariane the whole thing. You know what I mean? I don't think he's holding anything back from her.
And I think that those two kids think they're a lot better schemers than they really are, both Ariane and Quentin. They think they think their schemes are hot fire, but they are quickly doused.
I actually don't think Quentin thinks that he is that good at it. Like, I'm pretty sure his whole mindset the entire time is like, wow, I am terrible at this. I am terrible at this. Why did Dad send me to do this? So,
well, on the way
he just wants to go home.
Yeah. I thought that he really did think showing up that he was that things were gonna work out. He had that false conception.
But anyway, it is 1:59, so we probably have less than a minute left. But thank you everybody who joined watching it live. Thank you for the great comments and questions.
Thank you for listening to Tara Lynn's A Geek Saga podcast. If you like what you heard, please check out my website, ageeksaga.com, or consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/ageeksaga.